I work for a government agency, always looking for good, enthusiastic men to help us carry out our directives.
You're telling me that there is a movie company in Hollywood right now that is funded by the CIA?
I think probably Hollywood is full of CIA agents, and we just don't know it.
I mean, can you ever really trust another human being? No, the answer is you cannot.
Either very smart or incredibly stupid.
Test. Everything's a test, remember? Nothing is what it seems.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the CIA and Hollywood. My name is Pierce Redmond, and this is Episode 9, Good Night and Good Luck.
Let me see this.
It's a loyalty oath to America.
Are you now, or have you ever been
joking first? Murrow signed it.
Murrow signed it? If you don't sign this, are you and I a target?
If I don't sign it, they'll fire me.
10 seconds.
Ready on camera. One.
Good evening.
Any man who protects communists is not fit to wear that uniform.
You can't convict people by rumor and hearsay and innuendo.
Are my children going to be asked who denounced me? Are they going to be judged on what their father was labeled? I see a chain reaction that has no end.
Charges were in a sealed envelope. Nobody saw them.
Wouldn't you guess that the people who have seen the contents of that envelope might have a better idea of what makes someone a danger to his country? Or do you think it should just be you that decides?
Who are the people? Are they elected? Are they appointed? Is it you?
I've searched my conscience, and I can't find any justification for this.
Our next show is going to be about Senator McCarthy. We're going to go right at him.
We will not walk in fear one of another. This is no time for men who oppose Senator McCarthy's methods to keep silent.
Mr. Edward R. Murrow has made repeated attacks upon me and those fighting communists.
Somebody's going to go down.
They're going to get audited this year.
Not me, you.
McCarthy wants April 6th.
I will not be deterred.
He's going to come after me.
You understand the position you're putting us in?
Let's walk very carefully through these next few moments.
Why don't you just fire me, Bill?
Go after Joe Kennedy. We'll pay for it.
Murrow is the symbol, the leader, and the cleverest of the jackal pack, engaged in propaganda for communist causes.
Okay, fellas, here we go.
We might as well go down swinging.
We're going to go with the story, because the terror is right here in this room.
10 seconds.
5, 4, 3, 2.
We cannot defend freedom abroad by deserting it at home. Good night, and good luck.
Welcome, everyone. It's great to be doing another episode. It's great to be talking to you guys. It's great to be talking to everyone listening. And today, of course, we're going to be talking about Good Night and Good Luck, a 2005 historical drama that retells the story of the legendary Ed Murrow-Joe McCarthy fight of 1954. And the film covers events in both 53 and 54, beginning with the tale of Milo Radulovich, an Air Force lieutenant who was kicked out of the military because his father was a suspected communist. Murrow and the rest of the crew behind the CBS series See It Now come to the defense of Radulovich and his family, arguing that pursuing charges against people based on secret evidence is unjust. The film then portrays the infamous See It Now episode where they attacked Joe McCarthy personally, using clips of McCarthy's own speeches and statements to show him contradicting himself. We then see McCarthy's response, where he accused Murrow of being a communist, and some of the fallout from this struggle, including the suicide of CBS newscaster Don Hollenbeck, and the decline of See It Now from a weekly primetime show to an occasional Sunday afternoon special. The film ends with a reconstruction of Murrow's 1958 speech to the Radio and Television News Directors Association, where he extols the virtue of TV to educate and illuminate, and warns of its ability to distract and amuse and insulate its audience. So, Pierce, just your initial impressions on this movie, and please introduce our guest. Yeah, I guess my initial impressions are it's not the greatest movie of all time. I think in terms of style and technique, I think it's actually kind of weak.
I will say that this, along with many of the films we covered last season, this was one that I actually saw with my dad also. And we saw it in the theaters. And he actually kind of, filled me in on Murrow and some of the stuff that the movie initially left out. And of course, there's a lot more to that. So it's not really my favorite movie, but it is an interesting one. And it is a fascinating look at the trajectory that George Clooney and Grant Heslov would ultimately go on that would eventually lead to Argo. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest for the show. And our guest today is Ed Opperman. Ed is, of course, a private investigator, and he's also the host of the Opperman Report, which is an excellent podcast, radio show that Tom and I have both been on. And Ed, we're so glad to have you. How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you for having me, guys.
Excellent. Well, Ed, I guess generally speaking, we always ask the guests, what are your sort of initial thoughts of the movie, your opinion of the film? What did you like? What didn't you like? Just sort of give us your sort of general take on it.
Well, I saw the movie when it first came out. I believe I purchased it on pay-per-view, and I enjoyed it. I'm a big Murrow fan. I'm a big, fan of McCarthy. I can't say I'm a fan of McCarthy, but I'm a fan of that whole story. I'm very interested in. I've always been interested in who's that guy, Roy Cohn. And his story and his life. A very small part of this film. You think such a fascinating guy. They'd have more of him in there. Yeah. And I watched it again last night, and with a more keen eye. I enjoy the film, and at the time, I remember thinking when I first watched it, I remember thinking, boy, this is brave to do this film, and and Clooney and who's that guy, Robert Downey Jr. I said, oh boy, these are cool guys. They're always in good movies, and I enjoyed the film overall.
All right. Well, I guess then, why don't you kind of elaborate a little bit, Ed, on your sort of your views on the whole on Murrow, on McCarthy, on that sort of environment that was going on in the late 50s. You're as you would say on your radio show, pretty left wing guy, Ed. So give us your kind of opinions on it.
Yeah. I'm one of the guys that would have been, at the hearings, at the other end of those hearings, Right. So that wouldn't have been too comfortable for me. So I come up from that leftist background, that leftist history, WBAI in New York City and stuff like that. So Murrow was a hero, and McCarthy was always the villain, and Cohen was always the villain. So it's always been a cause I've championed and appreciated and looked into. I thought it was very unfair, the McCarthy hearings, of course, as long as everyone does now. And I've always been sensitive to that fear of the Red Scare and stuff my whole life, being, a leftist.
Absolutely. I was in I'll save it for later, but I have a slight Trump connection with this, and you might already have figured it out, Ed, but we'll wait until later. But I don't know, Tom, what are your kind of, I guess, thoughts on this? And sort of we both have sort of come at this movie with a slightly different angle, and we have some sort of interesting theories and reasons as to why this movie was made and why certain aspects of this movie were left out. So why don't you kind of flesh that out for us?
Well, I mean, like Ed, I'm, I suppose, a pretty left-wing guy, and I certainly sympathize. I mean, none of us here are defending McCarthy or McCarthyism. That much is absolutely clear, I think. But I mean, I like the movie in some ways. It's not the most climactic of films. It did remind me a bit of All the President's Men, in that it has this quite flat story arc, if you like. There's not a lot of peaks and troughs. It just sort of lays out a story. It tells a tale. And it does it all in this almost documentary style at times, and there's all this archive footage. And it is very convincing. It's, in some ways, a very realistic portrayal of at least that side of what was going on there. I don't think... I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong, Pierce. There's nothing in this that's, like, massively inaccurate. This isn't like Argo or Charlie Wilson's War, in that they've just shredded real history here. They've left stuff out.
Yeah.
But...
Yeah, they've left some stuff out. There's a few things with Murrow that they don't touch on. I don't think it's that they were deliberately going out of their way. But there's a few little, I guess, historical inaccuracies or maybe like distortions, but they're nothing on the level of Argo, that's for sure.
And so, I mean, Ed, what we're going to try and do here is persuade you at least that there is more to this. Whether or not you actually buy everything that we're saying, we'll kind of, check as we go along and see how much of it you believe and how much of it you don't. And maybe by the end we'll have persuaded you and maybe we won't have. But essentially, that's what we're going to try and do with this episode, rather than just strictly review the film. And, I mean, let's start with Ed Murrow, because obviously McCarthy accused Murrow of being a communist. Once Murrow actually went after him, that was the inevitable and predictable response. And I think it's fair to say Murrow wasn't a communist, in any meaningful sense anyway. And Pierce, he wasn't really quite as anti-establishment as I think this film likes to portray him.
No.
I think that was the conclusion that we came to when we were looking into this. So why don't you lay out some of the steps that you in particular, found in us coming to that conclusion?
Yeah, for starters, Murrow wasn't quite the anti-establishment journalist that he, in the movie, he's very much portrayed as a sort of white knight, single-handedly taking on McCarthy, and that's not really quite the truth. He came he admitted himself that he came very late to the battle. There's throughout the movie, they're quoting the New York Times journalist Jack Gould, who was for a very long time openly criticizing McCarthy. Most of the big sort of press outlets, newspapers, were all criticizing McCarthy. So Murrow was the first broadcast journalist to do this, but even that is a little the way he went about it. Of course, he attacked McCarthy very late, when McCarthy had sort of, even people like Nixon, who was one of McCarthy's buddies on HUAC, had turned against him. And there were lots of rumors of McCarthy's drinking and whatnot. So he was sort of politically not quite as stable. And of course, Murrow was a longtime correspondent in England. He was very close with the U.S. military. He actually, after World War II, he did voiceovers for DoD films. And one of the major kind of distortions in the movie is the scene where the Air Force generals come. And it's portrayed as they're sort of attacking the George Clooney or Fred Friendly, and Friendly is sort of shooting back at them. And it is that did happen. They did actually meet these Air Force generals. But in reality, it was a much more amicable sort of conversation. And Friendly wrote later in life that the Air Force general said, quote, "You have always gotten complete cooperation from us, and we know that you won't do anything to alter that." So obviously the military was, and again, Murrow was in the Naval Reserves. He joined in 1959. He always maintained close relationships with the Pentagon. And he also, of course, met William Paley during World War II, when Paley was working for psychological operations for, I believe it was at the time, it was the War Department's Information Agency, something of that effect. And again, Murrow was no stranger to myth making. He exaggerated how old he was when he applied for CBS. He said that he had a degree in political science and international relations, which he didn't. He also said he had a master's from Stanford, which wasn't true either. And of course, Murrow would later sort of open the door for these sort of Barbara Walters type celebrity entertainment news sort of segments with his show Person to Person. And then, what the film doesn't get into, and this is just by virtue of the fact that they're looking at really only 5 months of time. It's a very limited in the scope that the movie is discussing. After CBS and all this sort of stuff, Murrow would go on to be the head of the U.S. Information Agency. Now, he was appointed in 1961 under JFK. And anyone that doesn't know, the U.S. Information Agency is that is the department that oversees all propaganda that the U.S. puts out. So they're in charge of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Voice of America, Radio Marti, all of the propaganda that was going out. Murrow headed this. And this is, again, at a time when the Cold War was reaching new heights. This was just as Vietnam was starting to become a serious issue geopolitically. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, the last recommendation that Ed Murrow made was for a very controversial figure, Barry Zorthian, who would become the chief U.S. spokesman in Saigon. And just for a little color, Zorthian was a member of Skull and Bones. He worked for CBS and later Voice of America. He was a diplomat in India and was also the media advisor to General Westmoreland. And he was famous for saying that Vietnam was the most open war in U.S. history. So kind of an interesting character. He's very he was seen as a very negative force. In that he kind of covered up a lot of what was going on. So Murrow himself is sort of an interesting character. And again, for all of this heroics about how he wanted to, that television could be open, it could be free, we could take on big things. He then, of course, goes on to work for the U.S. government. And again, within the U.S. Information Agency, he was a member of the National Security Council. So this is a very high position. But I think even more so is who was working at CBS at the time. And this is one of the things that Tom and I are really interested with this film is the numerous CIA connections throughout CBS. And it's interesting too. Clooney in interviews will always say, "Oh, this was, the news was great. It worked for 30 years. It was wonderful. It was open. It was free. There was no manipulation." And Murrow was sort of the high point of media. Yet this was at a time when the CIA was basically taking over organizations like CBS, the New York Times, and Time Magazine. Those are the three big ones. And I'm sure people are familiar with the Carl Bernstein piece on this, what's now called Operation Mockingbird. But of course, Paley was a longtime friend of Allen Dulles. They both met when they were in World War II, and that's also where Paley met Murrow. And since the very beginning, CBS has always been seen as the CIA's most important broadcaster. Dulles and Paley sort of went into sort of negotiations, and they used CBS as a front in that they would have agents posing as journalists. They would also just have simply journalists at CBS providing information that they would be debriefed. And this is all kind of out there. And there's also some interesting stuff that Tom's going to get into, some documents. But I will say this: aside from Paley's deep connections, Sig Mikkelsen, who is portrayed by Jeff Daniels in the film, he was the director of CBS News, so he was Murrow and Friendly's immediate boss. But he was also Paley's designated contact overseer for CIA operations within CBS. And this is something that Mikkelsen is fairly open about. He thought that this was a great idea. He had no problem with it. And it's actually very interesting. At one point, he actually complained to Frank Stanton, who was the president of CBS, about how he had to keep running outside to use a payphone to call the CIA. So Stanton suggested that he set up a direct line in his office that bypassed the CBS switchboard and went directly to the Central Intelligence Agency, which Mikkelsen did. And then later, Mikkelsen would go on to head Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty from 1975 through 1978. So, what we're trying to sort of elaborate here is that, and Tom will sort of fill us in, there's some more, the CBS seemed to be filled with either current people working for the CIA or former members of OSS, the precursor to the CIA. So I think this is an interesting factor to kind of clue in here, especially when Clooney is saying, there's no control, that there are all these sort of things. But I think the amount of CIA influence that we'll get into, corporate control and self-censorship that was present in the news from the earliest days, a real question is, was it really ever free? And therefore, what was possibly going on with the Murrow-McCarthy fight that was going on? But I don't know, Tom, I'll throw it back to you. But that's the sort of general kind of outline.
Yeah, sure. Well, first I want to ask you, Ed, how much of this were you already aware of? How much of this had you heard of before? And does it really impact that much on your perspective on this? Because you're quite pro-Murrow, like you say. So I'm just wondering here.
Well, yeah, it does bring up some new information to me, that's for sure. Because the CBS has always been portrayed as the leftist, the right wing. CBS is like liberal, communist, but I was aware of, Operation Mockingbird and stuff like that, about how and I was aware too of Murrow's involvement with Radio Free Europe and that kind of stuff as well. So yeah, I take all that with a grain of salt. I just assumed but you're bringing up a lot of new stuff to me.
Okay, so are we giving you at least some pause for thought on this?
Oh, absolutely. But you said before, would I buy into? I don't have to actually buy anything, do I? Because I didn't bring my checkbook.
No, fair enough. Well,
I'm ready to make a purchase today. But
well, let me get into another character and see if I can sell you on him. Okay. We've got another guy who's a senior CBS executive, former OSS guy, by the name of E. Michael Burke, who, if people don't know about, you should at the very least go and check out his wiki page, because he led a fascinating life. I mean, this is a guy who did all kinds of things. He owned sports teams. He was a media executive. He was a spy. He started out in the US Navy and then got recruited into the OSS in World War II, served in Algiers and then in Italy, before they parachuted him into France to help arm and organize the French resistance. After the war, he becomes a technical advisor, one of the first in Hollywood of this sort, a technical advisor to a Warner Brothers film called Cloak and Dagger, which is all about the OSS and is a really interesting film. He wanted to become a screenwriter, but that didn't really work out, so he goes to work for the CIA. And he uses his job at Warner Brothers as a cover for traveling around doing CIA spying stuff. He officially leaves the agency in 1954 and, believe it or not, joined the circus for a while, and he then becomes president of CBS Europe. He then comes back to the USA in the mid-50s and becomes vice president in charge of diversification. So when I found out about this guy and read his biography, as it were, I went looking in the CIA's online archive, their Freedom of Information electronic reading room, they call it, just to try and find documents and try and find references to this guy, and found all kinds of things, including that he tried to float himself as a possible replacement for Alan Dulles after the Bay of Pigs fiasco. So he was another guy who was in touch with Dulles and who was still had a relationship with the CIA even after he left. But the really funny story is that in 56, so a couple of years after Murrow McCarthy, the CIA finds out that this low-rent film company called Flamingo Films, which you can just imagine what sort of company it was, something like that, they were planning on making a TV film series about the OSS, and they'd even got an assistant of Bill Donovan's on board as an advisor. The agency finds out about this through Larry Lohman, who was the vice president of TV at CBS, and who himself had also been in the OSS back in the war. Lohman tells a filmmaker, John Nash, knowing that Nash is friendly with the CIA, and so Nash tells the agency about this. Where it gets really funny is where the CIA also intercepted a letter from Leslie Harris, who was head of TV films for CBS. Why they were spying on his mail, I'm not sure. The memo doesn't say, but basically this letter is him explaining to a lawyer that he'd be interested in doing this film series, but only if they could get the CIA to officially cooperate and sponsor the thing. And so the CIA decided to approach CBS and get them to develop a rival TV series in the hope of squeezing this other one out of the market. And so Harris and Michael Burke meet with Alan Dulles, but they wanted to make like a full year-long 39-episode series with the agency logo and official endorsement and all of that. And the CIA at that point weren't prepared to do that. In fact, even today, they don't really do that. They do sponsor shows quite heavily, but you don't see, sponsored by the CIA at the beginning. So, yeah, the CBS show doesn't happen because of this. But at the same time, the Flamingo Films one doesn't happen. So as far as the CIA are concerned, this is all successful. They've managed to stop this project that they didn't want it to happen. And then, a few months later, Michael Burke writes back to the CIA. He writes to Lyman Kirkpatrick, asking about just doing like a one-off documentary show on the OSS, which did get made. And so I mean, none of this impacts directly on the Murrow-McCarthy question, because this is all happening a couple of years down the line. But once again, it shows that there's all these ex-OSS guys in very high positions at CBS that were obviously still quite cozy with the CIA at this point. And so, yeah, I just think it fleshes out an idea that on the one side you have McCarthy, and before him HUAC and the FBI, and certainly J. Edgar Hoover, who was extremely anti-communist at this time. But on the other side, you do seem to have, like you said, Ed, the kind of left-wing media, who, in particular in the form of CBS, had a very close relationship and an ongoing relationship with the CIA. And so I guess the broad hypothesis that we're suggesting here is that this whole the anti-communist surge that you saw after World War II was very much being fueled by the right, and in this case represented by the FBI. But the pushback against that does seem to have been, to some extent, encouraged and supported by the CIA. That's the broad hypothesis, I think, that we're getting at here. But, I mean, Pierce, just before we ask Ed once more, do you have anything to add to this?
No, I think you've definitely sort of fleshed that out. I guess just to sort of again to reiterate this idea, and this is something that we've seen actually throughout this series. We've seen the CIA seemingly cozying up to left-wing people or suspected communists. We saw that with Michael Redgrave, who, while being a suspected communist, is making all of these CIA-assisted films, and then later gets a knighthood. We saw that there's something very odd with Dalton Trumbo. Again, this part of the Hollywood 10. He was I guess he would say he was a communist, or at least a socialist. Yet again, very close with the DOD, and then goes on to make very influential, I guess, one of the first truther films about JFK. So there does seem to be a pattern. And again, this is, the CIA around the same time was funding left-wing groups that were influential in the abstract expressionist art movement. So there does seem to be at least a sort of tacit approval of this, or that they're somewhat comfortable with working with what you would assume, this is their ultimate enemy. So yeah, I think that there does seem to be something going on. And just to sort of reiterate again, when you have people like Sig Mickelson, who's like essentially a CIA agent, but also Lohman, Paley, Burke, there's a couple other CBS characters. You do wonder if they're all sort of essentially friends with the CIA, then what's going on? Are they sort of signing off on letting Murrow do this? So, that's all I had to say.
Well, Ed, are we selling you yet, or?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, you are. It's very, very interesting. I like the whole theory. Very interesting. You mentioned this guy Burke got involved with the circus. Okay, because I had Daniel Hopsicker on my show from Mad Cow Morning News. He's the guy that did all that investigation to the 9/11 flight schools. Done great work. And I asked him, well, why do you call your video Muhammad Atta's Flying Circus? And he told me, he says, well, the circus has a history of CIA infiltration in this country because they're able to travel overseas and travel around, do all kind of stuff like that. So very interesting. I'm not surprised he was involved in a circus. Now, I guess the theory you're trying to present here is that this whole thing was a show orchestrated by the CIA, which is interesting because they would have that dirt on Shine and Cohn and that homosexual relationship. They would be aware of that. And they would see that this FBI-controlled anti-communist McCarthy hearings were stepping on their own guys that they had infiltrated in the media, because they would bring all these movie stars and actors and stuff in there, and writers.
Well, or even beyond that, this represents some kind of turf war.
Right.
After World War II, when you actually formally get the establishment of the CIA, it's evident from anything you read about Hoover or from Hoover's own pen in that time, he hated the CIA. He didn't trust them. He thought they were essentially a threat to his position as well. And so I'm just wondering if they saw in this particularly rabid form of anti-communism with McCarthy and with HUAC before it, whether they saw an opportunity to kind of nail down some of the people they didn't like. I mentioned before this film Cloak and Dagger, right, which was produced with OSS cooperation. This was immediately after World War II. And that film was written by one of the Hollywood 10. I can't remember which one off the top of my head, but it was definitely written. And funnily enough, that film appears in the FBI's files on communist infiltration of Hollywood. They said this film was effectively communist propaganda, which it isn't at all. If you watch the film, it's not remotely communist. But so this is what we're trying to flesh out here, and this is what we're trying to explain, is that we have this hypothesis that there was some kind of turf war between the two agencies, with the FBI broadly speaking on the right and the CIA broadly speaking on the left. And that Murrow McCarthy, I suppose, is just a kind of center point to that. It's just a jewel in the middle of this much larger story. Is this making sense to you? I mean, you've got more perspective on this because you're older than us, and you've learned a lot more, you've lived a lot more. So, yeah.
It does make sense. This is definitely a very logical hypothesis here.
Okay. Well, the other side of this that we wanted to get into with you, which might persuade you, you might buy, you might not. It's up to you, of course. Free market and all that. Is who actually made this film, Good Night and Good Luck. Because that's kind of what we put together on the real stuff, on the real history of what was going on in the 50s and in that post-war period. But this film itself has a lot of very curious people and a curious company behind it. And Pierce, I know you wanted to get into Clooney and Heslov a little, and even Strathairn, David Strathairn, who plays Murrow himself. So yeah, have at it.
Yeah, I guess as I said in the first episode, I actually hate George Clooney. I find him really irritating. I think I will say this. I do, and it pains me to say this, I do think he's a very smart person. I think in terms of CIA actors or in Hollywood, he's not Ben Affleck, who's just an idiot. I think Clooney is actually quite intelligent, and he really understands the game that can be played in Hollywood if you sort of cozy up to the right people. But of course, this would mark the second movie that Clooney directs. The first one we're going to cover in the next episode. But this very much sort of solidifies the Clooney-Heslov production team. The two of them wrote this together. They produced it. Heslov is featured in the film. He's a small character. And this, to us, seemed very much like the type of movie that the CIA would be looking for, in that they heroize a character who I guess deserves some, some laudits. Yeah, absolutely. But they do make him into a sort of like a Charlie Wilson type character where he can do no wrong. And there's nothing, there's nothing bad on him. There's no dirt on Murrow in this. And not that there's like a ton, but there are little things here and there. So I think that this movie is very much is a classic sort of example of the methods that the CIA-assisted Hollywood films employ. They present a myth as truth. They present the reality of the event as this is exactly what happened. This is, again, the concept of hyperreality, in that, movies very much fill in our sort of gaps on stuff we don't know. So when we see a movie like this, we take it as fact. And again, Clooney and Heslov were very open. We did a lot of research, and undoubtedly they did.
They even had members of Murrow's family and people from CBS.
Yes.
Kind of consultants on the film. I mean, if you look at the list of thanks for this film, it contains a lot of names.
And just to sort of note in the sort of the films that Clooney was making at the time, when he made Good Night and Good Luck, he had just finished filming Syriana, which is a very CIA-assisted film, and he portrays Bob Baer, essentially, who's a real interesting character. And, for all of Bob Baer's, I don't, once you're out of the agency, you're out. That doesn't really seem to be the case. But so again, we can go back even a little bit further. Clooney had just recently made Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, which is all about the CIA. Then he goes and he does Syriana. And then later he goes and makes Goodnight and Good Luck. And this seems like another sort of stepping stone towards Clooney and Heslov's ultimate goal, which of course would later become Argo several years later. And again, in that, this movie does a lot of the things that the CIA likes in films. It heroizes people. It presents a particular narrative as the absolute truth. So this is stuff they like. But furthermore, of course, the production company behind this movie is one that I believe we definitely mentioned it in season 1, but it's a company called Participant Media. Now, Participant Media was founded by Jeffrey Skoll. And Jeff Skoll is one of the 7 wealthiest, Canadians in the world. He's one of the richest people in the world. He's the former president of eBay. And I guess after eBay, and he did some sort of, he set up like a foundation and did some other work. And then he just all of a sudden decided, I'm going to go to Hollywood and create a movie production company. And Participant Media seems to do a couple things. One is they do a lot of these sort of do-gooder type movies. So they were the producers behind An Inconvenient Truth, Fast Food Nation. They've done The Cove, which is a great movie. Food Inc., another one. But they also have a habit of producing these movies that have various connections to the Central Intelligence Agency. So just quickly, as I noted, they did Syriana. They did Goodnight and Good Luck. They were also involved in Charlie Wilson's War, as I mentioned. Standard Operating Procedure. It's an interesting movie with Errol Morris. They've done several movies on Jack Abramoff. They also were involved in the production of The Fifth Estate, which is a Bill Condon movie, which was the first movie about Julian Assange. They were also involved in Citizen 4, which is a Laura Poitras movie all about Edward Snowden. They also recently did Bridge of Spies, which is a Steven Spielberg movie, obviously about the CIA. And they were also involved in Our Brand is Crisis, which is a movie I've mentioned before. This is a theatrical version, but again, very interesting. For anyone who doesn't know, Our Brand is Crisis is all about James Carville going down to Bolivia and trying to circumvent the election and get a pro-Western candidate in there. And they've also done, the sort of regular movies, like they did Lincoln, they did The Help. So they also do sort of just general big Hollywood blockbusters. But they seem to be very much involved in a lot of interesting movies with a lot of interesting connections. I think, too, and maybe I'm wrong, they were also involved in the Valerie Plame movie, but I might be confusing.
Fair Game.
Yes, I think they were. Yeah,
they were.
So again, they seem to produce a lot of the same movies, or at least in terms of the connections to these sort of people. And Participant is just one of these companies that we always sort of look for. And again, it's got a lot of the makings of a CIA. It's got one of the founders of eBay, so fabulously wealthy, obviously connected in some way to the sort of digital spying that's going on. I can only assume that Jeff Skoll knew about this when he was at eBay. So there's already sort of a connection there. And then they go on to make some very curious films. And interesting, too, they also did Darfur Now, which is a documentary that George Clooney stars in. And it was around this time that Clooney starts making Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, Syriana, then he does Goodnight and Good Luck. He also, around this time, got very involved in East Africa and Central Africa, particularly in Darfur. And this is also the same time that he gets hooked up with John Prendergast, who's a noted deep state agent, who was part of Bill Clinton's National Security Council. He's very involved in what was going on with the genocide, orchestrating the genocide in Rwanda with Paul Kagame and Congo. And then he became, BFF with George Clooney. This was the time when Clooney was sort of shifting into his, I'm going to be a CFR member and get involved in geopolitics and all of that sort of stuff. So this is a very important time for Clooney in that he's kind of setting himself as I'm beyond an actor, and of course Syriana is when he won his first Academy Award. So a very curious sort of time period and trajectory, I think, that's going on with Clooney and Heslov. They seem to be meeting the right people, making the right kind of films. And as you mentioned, too, David Strathairn, who plays Edward R. Murrow, would then sort of go on to work in the Jason Bourne movies, and he's in 2 and 3. And these are, again, very heavily influenced by the CIA. So, Participant is a particular company to look at because they seem to really be doing a lot of these movies, and again with a sort of what people would associate with a sort of Hollywood left. So very interesting.
Well, and I mean, for me, it's in some ways even more simple than that. You have Clooney makes Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, in which he plays a CIA agent handling someone in the entertainment industry. He goes on to make this film, and Syriana, in which he plays a CIA agent based on a very real CIA agent, Bob Baer. You have Grant Heslov, who, prior to doing this, what launched him to stardom was True Lies, which is like the most DoD-supported film of the 1990s, and Enemy of the State, which is CIA-sponsored. So they were already kind of moving a little bit, I think, in these circles, and what we're seeing with this run of films is their ascendance, if you like, into that world. Because it's not until, I think, 2009, 2010 that Clooney actually joined the Council on Foreign Relations. That's several years later, and then it's a year or two after that they make Argo, which, again, is about the CIA in Hollywood, the CIA in the entertainment industry. And Strathairn, however you pronounce his name, he likewise goes on to portray the leader of Operation Blackbriar in the Bourne films. He is like a senior CIA agent. So all of these people seem to sort of graduate from Good Night and Good Luck into certainly bigger films, and also films that in some way always portray the CIA, even if whether they were or were not involved in the production. And just one more, because there is another one in the cast that I just thought we'd highlight, is the guy who could not be called anything else, Tom McCarthy. I can only assume they picked him partly because of his name, who plays Palmer Williams, another CIA broadcast journalist in the background of all of this. And he had previously starred in Meet the Parents, which was CIA assisted, and we discussed that in episode 2. He was in Syriana alongside this film. He was also in Fair Game, the adaptation of Valerie Plain's book. And most amusingly, not that this is to do with the CIA, but Ed, have you ever seen the show The Wire?
Yes, I have.
You know, in the 5th season of that, there's the journalist who fabricates this contact with the serial killer?
No, I don't. The Wire is the one about the Baltimore, right? The drug dealers in Baltimore?
Yeah. In the 5th season, McNulty effectively invents a serial killer, and there is a journalist at the Baltimore Sun who's pretending he's in contact with this fake serial killer. And that guy is played by Tom McCarthy. So in this film, he's playing, a journalist of the highest integrity, and he went on a couple of years later to be the most kind of scumbag, make everything up journalist you could possibly imagine. But, yeah, Ed, I mean, were you aware of this stuff about Clooney? I know I've rattled on a bit about this, and Pierce has too, but, I mean, I quite like Clooney as an actor, as a comic actor at least. I think he can be very, very funny. But there is this serious side to him as well, and this film does seem to be part of that trajectory, part of that storyline. So are we giving you cause to rethink Clooney?
No, I had my suspicions about Clooney. Okay, obviously, it's Syriana, and all these movies, and even A Dangerous Mind, all these kind of movies always had, a suspicious eye on him. And now he's married to this woman who's like a world Hague attorney, with whatever she's doing. But let me tell you a little local story about Clooney here. When I first moved to Las Vegas in 2000. George Clooney used to come all the time down to Green Valley Ranch Casino, which right now is walking distance from where I live right now. It's a nice little casino. It's owned by the Furtado brothers. who own all the Sunset Station, all the local casinos. They got a whole big chain of them out here. Palace Station, they started with Palace Station, they got all the Sunset Station, all the station casinos. And they're involved with some local politics too, where they do some shady stuff. And they're they got caught. It was in the papers. And they
say what you like, Ed. It's fine.
And also, too, they're behind mixed martial arts, the MMA fights. They're the guys. Yeah, they're the guys behind that. Now, I don't know what this does for you guys, but let me tell you a little story I heard. We used to read all the time about George Clooney coming here and staying at Green Valley Ranch. And what I heard is, when he won money, he would keep the money. But if he lost money, they worked out a deal with him where he would walk around the casino and take pictures with people and shake people's hands, and they'd forgive him what he lost.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, no, sure, but whatever grooming was going on there, who knows? Huh?
Nice work if you can get it. Yeah,
yeah. And just to kind of dump on Clooney again. As I said, he's so into we gotta do something about Darfur and all these things, and he has a very skewed view of the conflicts going on in Central and East Africa. But this guy also works for the most despicable corporation that's destroying Africa, and that's Nestle. He does all these Nespresso commercials that are now making their way to the U.S. for the first time ever. Him and Danny DeVito, they've been doing these in Europe for years and years, and now the Nespresso commercials are coming to the U.S. And of course, Clooney would only sign up with Nestle if they pretended like they were giving, Nestle has some sort of silly, fund where they help poor African farmers. Of course, they're buying up all the water all over Africa. Clooney definitely seems, he's connected with government people. He's connected with large multinational corporations, with Hollywood. So, him walking around losing money in Vegas and then taking some pictures doesn't surprise me at all.
Well, it makes you wonder who's he connected to there, because obviously there wouldn't just, obviously Vegas is mobbed up and has been for a long time. I'm not necessarily suggesting that, but where you get mob, you get intelligence agents. We can only assume that Vegas is one of those places that they would be keeping an eye on, because a lot of high rollers, a lot of business getting done and all of that. So, yeah.
Well, let me tell you, we got here in this town, we have Sig Rogich, who, is huge public relations guy that picks candidates. You got the Sheldon Adelson, who donates $100 million. He's picking candidates over here. And we also had in this town, when I first came to this town, we had a guy named Bob Mayhew, who was a fascinating guy, most well known as Howard Hughes' fixer, former FBI, former CIA.
Right.
And everything. Okay, if you look at this guy's involved in everything. So this town has a lot of that kind of stuff going on.
That's the guy who was fictionalized in American Tabloid by James Ellroy, the Howard Hughes fixer. No, I'm just sorry. I'm just sort of pulling that one completely out of left field. It has nothing to do with what we're saying. It just occurred to me when you said that. So it does make you wonder, who is it that Clooney's really mixing with in that town? You mentioned. So what were these shady dealings, Ed, at this casino that Clooney was affiliated with?
Well, the Furtado brothers, the big scandal when I first moved here with the Furtado brothers was that they had put out some leaflets or flyers and a political campaign, and they didn't officially produce their oath, that they didn't, you have to come out and say, who's behind political leaflets and political commercials. They had done it secretly. And that was the big scandal with them back at that time. But now they're just so powerful, there's nothing that can touch them.
Okay, so we better not talk about them too much then, otherwise we might get you into trouble, and that's the last thing that we would want, Ed, to be honest. Pierce, what's the Donald Trump connection? Because I haven't got a clue.
Oh, well, I'm sure Ed knows this, but so a character who is an amazing, fascinating character, Roy Cohn, who was McCarthy's sort of number two, his right-hand man, who he helped prosecute the Rosenbergs. He was very, while Roy Cohn was closeted, he was very instrumental in the Lavender Scare, where he would basically go after anyone that was gay and, threaten to expose them or blackmail them unless they testified a certain way. But Roy Cohn also went on to be one of the most powerful lawyers and sort of middlemen in New York City. He defended the big sort of mafioso Anthony Salerno, Galeante. He was Steve Rubel's lawyer at Studio 54. He represented the Archdiocese of New York, but he was also Donald Trump's lawyer and mentor. And Roy Cohn was very instrumental in helping Trump get a lot of his early real estate deals, like in the late 70s and the early 80s in Manhattan. Roy Cohn basically oversaw all of that and knew, he could get the Teamsters and the mafia guys that owned all the cement. He could get that. He could talk to politicians. And he was Donald Trump's mentor. And also, Ed, he was a mentor to Roger Stone when the two of them worked together for Ronald Reagan's campaign. So that's the Donald Trump connection. And Roy Cohn is just such a fascinating... I wish they did more with him. But obviously it's a movie talking about a very specific time period.
Okay, another thing about Roy Cohn is he never paid any taxes. Okay?
Oh, yes, right. Yeah.
He said that his whole life was a business expense. His rent, his phone, everything was a business. His meals, everything was a business expense. I met Roy Cohn.
Really?
Yes.
Why does this not surprise me?
Yeah.
You've met like everyone you could imagine.
Roy Cohn was George Steinbrenner's attorney for the New York Yankees.
Right.
In 1985, I owned a nightclub in Manhattan, and I was a very wealthy guy. I was doing very well for myself. And I used to get my shirts made at a place called G. George, which was a custom shirt maker that you can get your shirts made in Manhattan. And I was getting there to have my shirts fitted. And who was in there with me? Roy Cohn getting his shirts and George Steinbrenner getting his shirts done. All three was there with our shirts and in our underwear. Getting measured by G. George. So that was like 1985. A couple of other things, though, but you talk about Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn, you got to look into this stuff with Maury Terry and The Ultimate Evil. Roy Cohn was a fixture at Studio 54, and who was down there too? The Son of Sam cult used to hang out then at Studio 54 as well. And there's a lot of allegations that Roy Cohn was connected to that cult and had all kinds of. You should get on Jim Rothstein, who has a lot of information about Roy Cohn.
Well, this is just sort of occurring to me, but I wonder how connected Roy Cohn was with it. He's certainly running in the kind of circles that would, I'm sure he met people within the CIA. But it's interesting, you're just talking about, he was Steinbrenner's lawyer. This is also when Michael Burke used to own this CBS CIA agent used to own the Yankees at one point when CBS bought the Yankees, I think alongside Steinbrenner. So I wonder how connected Roy Cohn could have been. And again, it's interesting that he's McCarthy's second in command. And then he goes on to lead this, truly insane, extravagant life.
Just to pile on top of that, yes. As I remember, Burke fell out with the other guy who owned the Yankees. Steinbrenner. So you have the same conflict, if you like, playing out once more, but in the microcosm of just the New York Yankees boardroom, where you have the guy who's loyal to, McCarthy's right-hand man.
Yes.
Falling out.
Yeah.
With Burke, who was very much part of the CBS CIA connected crowd. And not that necessarily adds up to an awful lot, but one thing I was going to say is, since you brought it up, does Trump represent McCarthyism now?
Me or Ed?
Well, anyone. I'm just throwing the question out there.
I think I'll go for. I think he represents at least a sort of revival of it. Donald Trump seems more. I think that even if you don't like McCarthy, I think he genuinely thought that he was doing the right thing. I think that he really was. He was concerned about communist infiltration. And in his mind, he was doing what was necessary. Whereas I think Trump is doing whatever he feels like when he wakes up in the morning. I don't think he really cares at all about, I was just watching an interesting documentary about Trump from the 80s. And, for Mr. I Hate Illegal Immigrants, he hired more illegal immigrants to work on all of his buildings in the early 80s. So I think that McCarthy truly had an ideology to what he did, and I think Trump is just whatever. He'll say anything. But I don't know, Ed. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Interesting. I just saw something where Fred Trump, Donald Trump's father, was the landlord for who's that folk singer? The guy, not Woody Guthrie. Yeah, Woody Guthrie. Yeah, Woody Guthrie had Fred Trump as a landlord, and in one of his songs, he talks about how his landlord was involved in race baiting and causing racism in the apartment building where they were at. Mm-hmm. Yeah, fascinating. And we found out that Trump's father, Fred Trump, was at a KKK rally. You know that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Of course, yeah.
What was the question about Trump again? Oh no, is he a demagogue or is he a McCarthy?
Well, does he represent some kind of neo-McCarthyism? I mean, it's certainly in the way that he's kind of treating anyone who's a Muslim as some kind of infiltrator, and just this whole atmosphere that we have now, and Trump is such a symbol of this, where race baiting has completely replaced what would have been red baiting and stuff like that. And we're seeing a lot of the same kind of dogmatic, exclusionary, this tribal mentality, this gang mentality that was very much a part of McCarthyism. I don't necessarily mean the exact political equivalent, but that same kind of mentality Trump seems to be representing and certainly whipping up because it, suits him and suits his celebrity and suits his campaign. So I was more driving that parallel. Do you see any of that?
Certainly a demagogue, okay? And he's tuned into that, the same kind of demagogue that McCarthy was, had to work on people's fears and to point the finger at this enemy, this, the shadowy enemy, But I think more with Trump is he's the consummate con man. And even when you hear him, I don't care what he's talking about. He's talking about Ted Cruz with the birth certificate or whatever. He'll repeat the same phrase 6 times, because that's what you have to repeat it 6 times to get in your memory. And he knows all this stuff instinctively. I can't believe he hasn't studied this kind of stuff because he's more con man, I would say, than McCarthy, but because I don't think he believes any of the things he's saying. I think it's all just for financial gain ultimately in the end and power and ego. Yeah.
Mm. Okay, let me fire one last one at you because I know you've got to go shortly, but much as we've been kind of, not exactly slating Murrow, but trying to flesh out who was Murrow, what was going on in CBS at that time, is this part of this turf war that we described? I know you're certainly thinking, you can see the plausibility in that, but despite all of that, I guess, would it be a good thing if we actually had an Ed Murrow today to take down Donald Trump? Because as much as I think he's a clown, he's quite a dangerous clown, and I really I just wish someone would tear him to pieces on primetime television. I really do. So I'm just wondering if you share that thought as a kind of closing idea here.
Absolutely. I do think that someone needs to tear him down. I don't think there's anybody with the kind of respect and authority that Murrow had in those days. I don't know who would come out now and have any kind of a standing to have that kind of impact.
Fair point.
Now, I've been to the Trump rally. I was just at a Trump rally the other day. And the press area, the people in the press, have no respect for him whatsoever. They're laughing at him like he's a big joke. He has no respect for the press. In fact, he runs his rallies, but his New York City cops, his New York City security staff, these ex-cops from New York, they're the ones that run his rally. He has no campaign staff. There's a bunch of cops.
No, sure. It's not full of spin doctors. It's full of ex-cops. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how he would run the country if he got involved with a brutal fist, So I would love to see someone in the press really stand up, and really call him out on this kind of Epstein stuff. And Clinton too. Clinton was here in town too. It was the same day as Trump. The Trump rally, they turned away, when the doors were closed, they turned away about 1,500 people. At the Clinton rally later on that night, Bill Clinton was here in town. Only 700 people showed up. According to the Review Journal, when I saw there was about 400 people. And some of them were high school kids that were just, because it was held at a high school. So a very small crowd for Clinton. And Bernie Sanders, forgetting it, people marching in the streets all over the place. No one reports on that. So I would love to see someone stand up to Trump, or even grassroots. We get 30 people together to go to a Trump rally and scream out, "What about Jeffrey Epstein?"
That would be fantastic. Yeah. Well, Pierce, I mean, do you have anything to add before we polish off?
Well, yeah, just that I know that I think this episode is probably a bit different than what people were expecting. But I think that there's a lot going on in this movie beyond, we're just making a movie about Murrow. And it does sort of, I think, solidify Clooney and Heslov in particular as these are filmmakers to look out for, you know? And also it is sort of a timely movie in a lot of ways. And it's interesting when you're looking at, okay, Murrow is this guy who went after McCarthy, yet he's sort of surrounded by some interesting people. I sort of wonder, were they, because I mean, undoubtedly Mickelson, Paley, I mean, there's enough people at the CIA within CBS, they could have just squashed this. They wanted this to happen, to a degree. So
must have signed off on it to some extent.
Right. So that's a very interesting. Does the CIA kind of do they want to kind of keep the Red Scare in some degree, and we'll kind of keep the communists or the socialists, the leftists in another degree, and we'll kind of control the influence and level of power that they have, and also to kind of settle things down. So if we look at that and we say, okay, that ultimately sort of did happen, then we get into the 60s where obviously the Cold War is still raging, but it's not, if you're a leftist or a communist, it's not like you're going to get hauled away. And it's interesting to juxtapose that with what we see with people like Trump, and the level to which he seems to be kind of rising ever more, and the influence that he has. And again, the lack of media coverage on this guy. I mean, as I said, I mean, this guy is mobbed up. He's Roy Cohn's good friend. He's hanging out with pedophiles. He's doing every kind of illegal thing you could ever imagine. And yet no one is really calling him out. So I think it is interesting to look at this movie during this time. And of course, I mean, this movie was made when, Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay, the Iraq War, things like that were happening. And of course, Clooney and Heslov said we're not really trying to reflect on that, but inevitably it does sort of happen. So it's an interesting notion to think about. And it's also interesting to think that I think this is one of those instances where the CIA is manipulating what's going on, but it maybe wasn't the worst thing ever. So that's an interesting notion to think about. I think it's, generally speaking, it's all sort of doom and gloom when we talk about the CIA. But there does seem to be this sort of strange relationship that they have with communists or with leftists. And it's interesting to see how that may have played out vis-a-vis Murrow and McCarthy.
Sure. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. So, I mean, Ed, thank you so much. Your input on this has been kind of what we expected, but not exactly what I expected, to be honest. This conversation has gone in a different direction to the one we quite had in mind, but it's been great. It's been great talking to you about this. So thank you very much.
I'd like to throw in one last little quick comment, is that it's when McCarthy was going after the State Department, and it's been my experience that State Department and CIA are synonymous. And usually when I'm at a CIA convention, I meet a guy who's former CIA, they'll say, hey, I worked for the State Department. And that's kind of code for I work for CIA. So.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, very interesting parallel to draw. Well, yeah, thanks for your time today, because I know you've got to get running, my friend. So, yeah, this has been great.
Thank you very much, guys.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode of The CIA and Hollywood. If you enjoyed this podcast and you want to hear some more of me and Tom's work, as well as catch up on every episode of The CIA and Hollywood, then you can always visit my website, porkinspolicyreview.com, and you can always visit Tom at spyculture.com. For episode 10, we will be discussing the film Confessions of a Dangerous Mind with our friend Aaron Franz from theageoftransitions.com. Well, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will be talking to you very soon.